All right, one last thing to close out January. How about this? South Carolina will start 6-0 next season. We talked about the 2025 schedule and more. Locked On Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler, and I hope everyone's having a fantastic final day of January. Thank God we got through all 58 days, and it is now on to February. But we have one more show to close out the month, and before we do, I want to say thank you to everyone that made Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers, where we are free and available podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Remember, Game Time app, download it immediately, if not sooner. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time. All right, we got a quick episode for you today, but here's the deal. I was thinking about this earlier, and I think it's kind of relevant. There's an article came out 247 Sports the other day, and it was talking about how what are the toughest schedules to play in the SEC? And I've kind of looked at this going ahead into next year because I wanted to see where South Carolina would rank and how different it would even be from this year to last, or from last year to this year. And I told you guys this in July of last year, which is this. The schedule is the schedule. South Carolina fans and the team and Shane Beamer are never going to complain about, oh, man, we got a really tough draw. Look, what are we going to do? Because the schedule has been difficult every single year for the last decade and a half. This is the only team in the country that's had to play Georgia and Clemson every single year. You start thinking about how difficult that is, okay? Let me put that in perspective for you. That means that you have played on your schedule 2015, 2016, 18, 2017. So that's 4, 2021, 2022. So in the last 9 years, you have played at least one of the teams has played for a national championship, let alone not mention the four that they won, but you've played the team that played in the national championship game 6 times. It's been a really difficult schedule. Last year was also difficult, right? You get Ole Miss, you get Alabama, you get Clemson on the road. Like you get 2 of those 3 on the road. You get LSU at home. Some very difficult games. A&M at home was a top 10 team at the time. But here's the thing. Looking at the metrics that 247 is going with, I don't know if that's the best way to look at it because there's so much turnover from year to year. But right now, South Carolina has the 8th ranked hardest schedule for next year. And they're basing this off of win percentage. Okay? Win percentage. So going through it, right? We'll start with they finished at 8. It's a 594 winning percentage. Your opponents, you get Virginia Tech and Atlanta. You're already an 8.5 point favorite there. I don't love the 8.5 point favorite thing as of right now, strictly because from a standpoint of superstition, that's the same exact line that you had for the Illinois game and the bowl game. But you get Virginia Tech, Vandy. Remember, the Virginia Tech game is a game in Atlanta, so it's a neutral site, so you still get your 7 home games, I believe. South Carolina State, it's a win. Vandy win at Mizzou, Kentucky, at LSU, Oklahoma, Bama. Those are both at home. At Ole Miss, at A&M, Coastal Carolina at home, and then Clemson at home. I want to focus on something in the very beginning of that because it's something I feel very strongly about, and I was going to save it for the start of February, but we're gonna do it today. I think Carolina can start 5-0 or 6-1. There's a chance, realistically, they could go into the month of November with 1 loss. And it's very realistic. I don't want to get too ahead of my skis and think that you have to be undefeated or have 1 loss to have a chance of making the playoff by getting to the month of November with only 1 or 0 losses. But here, the schedule in November is this: at Ole Miss, that's going to be tough. They have a new quarterback. At A&M, very tough place to play. It's been a very tough place to play for South Carolina specifically. Coastal Carolina at home, that's a win. I don't love the setup there. I mean, like you played Wofford there a year ago, and now that's a home game against Coastal Carolina, so it's another FBS opponent, okay? And then Clemson at home. That game right there is going to potentially be, for the first time maybe ever, a game that could be the first of two. You could theoretically get to the postseason and play Clemson again if both teams make the college football playoff. And I don't know if that's that far-fetched. Anyway, but the first part of the season, the very first part of the season, tell me where the loss is, okay? Virginia Tech, South Carolina State, Vandy at home, okay? At home. At Mizzou with a new starting quarterback and their top receiver in program history gone. You're going to play with their best defensive end. They lost the other one that's one of the highest recruits they've had in the history of the program. He's gone to Nebraska. So, I mean, they should be good. They brought in some portal talent. They're one of only two teams in the SEC that ended up with more players they've gained from the portal versus lost from the portal, which is a pretty spectacular stat for them. But I don't think you're losing to them. And here's the thing, too. You're on the road against Mizzou. It was a close game last year, but they lose Brady Cook, who is the latest in line of every Mizzou 4-year starting quarterback. I don't know if there's ever been a starting quarterback at Mizzou that hasn't started for 3 or 4 years. Just like every single one of them for the last 25 years has done that. Now, you also think about this. Going into last season, Shane Beamer was 2-10 in road games in the SEC. 2-10. Last year, that changed dramatically. And not only were you beating teams on the road, you were boat racing teams on the road. You had 4 games on the road in the SEC last year. You lost by 2 at Alabama, who was 7th in the country at the time. Took them right down the wire. You beat Oklahoma by 26. You beat Kentucky by 25. And then you beat Vandy by 21. Let me tell you right now, people that watch Bama in Texas, not an easy place to go to Vanderbilt. Like, Bama lost there. Texas won by 3. Texas is one of the last 4 teams in the college football playoff this year. So, I mean, going there winning by 21 is really impressive. So I feel like you've kind of turned the narrative on its head for Shane Beamer in terms of what he was able to do on the road. I think that's a really big deal going into next year. But again, we're done with the month of September here, and I don't see a loss. You're 5-0. Remember we talked about that last year, how important it was to get to October at least at 3-1, and we all kind of felt like, oh, maybe you're 2-2. You leave that Old Dominion game, you're like, oh God, what's going to happen against Kentucky? Then you get LSU at home, and blah blah blah. Like, you're hoping you're going to go 2-2 at that point, and you go 3-1. Pepper says hello. I don't think that you're going to be in a spot where you are less than 4-1. I think you're going to be 5-0 going into October. Then you get a week off before LSU. You get Oklahoma at home. Now, Oklahoma's going to be better. And then you get Bama at home. Here's where I think that this could really change things for the trajectory of the program. Those 3 games are not easy. At LSU, at Oklahoma at home, and then Bama at home. You get a week off before one of them, right? And then you get Oklahoma and Bama back-to-back. But both of them are at home. That Bama game is most likely going to be a night primetime game, right? I don't know what else is on October 25th. I can look it up at some point, but barring anything crazy, that feels like that's going to be a primetime game, and will it be? Then the LSU game, it's on the road, but you get a week off prior, right? And LSU is good at home, especially at night, if that game's at night, under Brian Kelly. I tell you what, if you get that game, like, it might hurt you almost that you're 5-0 because LSU should probably be around there too, or they might be coming off a loss to Clemson. But if you have those 2 teams that are 4-1 or both 5-0, that'll probably be a night game in Baton Rouge, which is going to be tough. But then you get to have the other 2 teams come back to Williams-Brice. And here's why it's a big deal. Going into last year, we saw that gauntlet in October, and we're like, okay, Ole Miss, top 5 team at one point, top 10 team for a lot of the season. We're gonna get them at home, and we have a week off to prepare. Well, how will that go? You lose by 24. Then you look at this and you're like, oh my God. Then you have to go to Bama. Then you're at Oklahoma, and Oklahoma, keep in mind, was a 4.5-point favorite when that game started throughout the week. Like, they were able to put so many pieces together at the end of the season last year What does this thing look like if South Carolina can put all those pieces together at the start of the season? Like, what does the wave of momentum look like if you're going into November at, let's add it up here, 7-1 or 8-0? Where are you ranked? What's the narrative that you're going to have? Because I think here's the thing. Going into from last season to this season, so the last thing we're going to say on today's episode, like I told you, can be a very short episode. But going in from last season, what the narrative was for South Carolina was this. Well, they're 3-3. Yeah, you can talk about the LSU game, blah, blah, but like most people outside the SEC just see the wins and loss column, and that's it. And then you talk about like, well, they got boat raced at home by Ole Miss, and they lost to Alabama. So it's like, yeah, I mean, they're good, but like you can't really get past the fact they lost to like 3 other good teams that they played. 2 of those games were at home. So then by the time you go to a 6-0 run to close out the year where you won 4 games out of 6 against ranked opponents at the time, where you boat raced a top 10 team at Texas A&M by 24 points, took Vanderbilt to the woodshed, beat them by 21, beat your arch rival on the road. But by the time you got to November, the narrative had already been made of, I don't know what else they can do. And we saw it play out. Like, even if they won every game, I did a show on this, and you guys thought I was crazy. They were 3-3, and I said, can they win out? Like, I kept following it up after the Oklahoma game. I was like, could they win out? Like, is there a possibility? And against all odds, they did. But the narrative had already been made. The assumption and the presumption of how good this team was based off their resume, but also based off of national media, what we think about this. Like the way that the 9-3 Alabama team was talked about versus the 9-3 South Carolina team was unbelievable. I would have understood it if it was Ole Miss, but it wasn't. It was Bama and South Carolina. And it was like, man, South Carolina could have easily beaten Alabama. I understand they didn't, but the narrative of those 2 teams, when one limps to the finish line, gets destroyed by Oklahoma, loses Tennessee, they limp to the finish line, and it's like, well, should they get in? Versus where South Carolina was, I think that if you can get off to a good start this year, and you are 6-0 or 5-0 with a loss at Death Valley at night, but then you figure out a way to bounce back against an Oklahoma team that should be better than last year, right? But they lost 26 players to the portal. They lost their starting quarterback. They're bringing a new one, but he's played in the Pac-2 last year, not even a Power 4 conference. So we'll see how that goes. If you can beat Oklahoma, and then you get to that Alabama game, and you can beat an Alabama team who might be starting a true freshman quarterback, still doesn't have a ton of depth on that on the back end of that secondary, and also the offensive line. Well, if that's the case, and you end up getting into November with impressive wins over, a team at Missouri that's probably going to be ranked, beating or playing the game in Death Valley at night, and then wins over Oklahoma and Alabama. If you can figure out a way to get to 7-1, listen, interchange one of the games with LSU and Bama or LSU and Oklahoma. If you win if you win in Death Valley and lose one of the ones at home, then you have a feather in your cap and a notch in your belt of saying, yeah, we won in Death Valley at night, or we won in Death Valley on the road. If you can get to 7-1 going into the final part of the season, it's a totally different ball game. It's a totally different ball game. The way the media will talk about this team and the way the committee will talk about this team to close out the year. It's if you are going into because here's the thing I can tell you for a 1,000% fact about people in general and human nature, but also with college football media people and that committee. We love confirmation bias. We love to tell ourselves we know what we know, because we're going to start doing it now. We're going to start doing it in July and August, all that kind of stuff, and talk about what we think we know. And once we see something like, oh, if I think South Carolina's going to be a top 10 team, and they go into pause. If they go into the end of the year, and we already think they were good in the preseason, and they show us they were 7-1 or 8-1 to go into the final games of the season, then you're going to have to do a lot of explaining to everyone else and being like, oh, no, they're not very good. I know we all thought they were going to be good in August, and they showed us nothing but that for the first 2 months. Even if they go 9-3, it's a much different look for the committee. It's at least a different look. It doesn't mean to get you in, but it's a different look for the committee. All right, that's all for today's show. I hope everyone had a fantastic week, as we talked about. Before we close out, I want to tell you about our friends at Game Time and the Game Time app. Listen, if you're going to the game tomorrow night against Texas A&M, make sure you use the Game Time app. Join up today. Download the app. Create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, all capital letters, for $20 off your first purchase. Now, my favorite thing about the Game Time app, where do I begin? It's the best customer service in terms of getting tickets, best customer service if you need to get rid of some tickets. It is also an incredible job catering to the needs of their actual consumer, which almost no one else does in the ticketing industry. Make sure you get the app. Download the Game Time app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time. All right, we will see y'all tomorrow, hopefully with a win against Texas A&M tomorrow night in basketball. But we will see y'all then. Go Cox.